Okay, so up to now I've been spending my time explaining the Herodian kings and their dynasty. I have shown their genealogy and given a picture of their lives according to the history given to us of the last century BC and the first century AD. The reason this was important is because now I'm going to explain why I believe the Herod family are the little horn of Daniel and the dragon of John's Revelation. As I stated in another video, the book of Daniel was fulfilled in the life and times of Jesus. Daniel's dream shows us the beasts of the empires that were to rule Judea and the Israelites up until the beast of Rome. And the beast of Rome fell shortly after the fall of Judea and the end of the kingdom of heaven under the first covenant with God, which was the area of Judea being the southern kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom included Judah, Levi, and some of the tribe of Benjamin, and the northern kingdom, who were the lost 10 tribes, were Reuben, Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Ephraim and Manasseh were the sons of Joseph, so they come under the one tribe of Joseph. So that makes 10 when you consider that Benjamin and Levi were in with Judah as the southern kingdom. These tribes are the northern kingdom, and they fell before the southern kingdom was taken away to Babylon. And I'm not going to go into it too deeply in this video, but they were the Samaritans. They were the people out in the known world, or the Roman world, and these are all the places that the apostles went preaching to. They were the Gentiles. They were the nations. So, let's just forget about the little gap, or the gap in between the 70 weeks, the 69th week and the 70th week of Daniel, because it's absolute rubbish, and it's Jesuit dispensationalism, or Jesuit futurism. And Jesus fulfilled this prophecy. There's no gap. There's no 2,000-year gap. I mean, why would God just create a prophecy about 69, 70 weeks and have a 2,000-year gap in the middle? It's just ridiculous. And it says he was cut off halfway through. It's because Jesus was cut off. He was crucified, and he rose again. Daniel 7:24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophesy, and to anoint the most holy. And any Christian reading this statement could know that Jesus fulfilled this. Jesus put an end to sins. Jesus was the most holy anointed. And when he died, the curtain in the temple was rent, and he put an end to sin. So I'm not going to argue this point. It's obvious to me. If it's not obvious to somebody else, then they need to do their research on this. But all the prophecies in Daniel were explaining the empires leading up to the time and what the Hebrew people should expect with their kingdom. And what the prophecy speaks of is all the empires that ruled over them. And it was fulfilled to the T. The angel explained the beast to Daniel, and giving an account of how the heads worked, how the horns worked, and how the crowns worked, when he explained the beast that identified the kingdom of Alexander. So we can figure out, using the same pattern with the book of Revelation to John, what the heads and the crowns and the horns are in the beasts of Revelation. It says, Daniel 7:9, and I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels burning fire. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. So they weren't only kings that arose, they were empires too. They were the kings were the head of that empire. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I would know the truth of the four beasts, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And the 10 horns that were on his head, or in his head, and the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So when did the saints possess the kingdom? When Jesus and the saints resurrected, and the kingdom of heaven was within us. You know, Jesus told us the kingdom of heaven is at hand when he was alive, and when he was resurrected, the kingdom of heaven came into its fruition with its first fruits resurrected, that being Jesus and the saints that were resurrected. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. Now, most biblical scholars, or whatever you want to call them, will show that that is the kingdom of Rome. We know that it is. I mean, the 3 other beasts were Babylon, the lion, Media-Persia, the bear, Greece, the leopard, and the strange mixture beast, which was Rome. I mean, it's obvious. The angel explains the first 3. We know that Rome didn't exist at the time of the prophecy, so, you know, it was a future prediction, but we know it's Rome. And he shall speak great words against the Most Holy, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given unto hand until a time and times and a dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. So I am saying, or I'm proposing, that this little horn that comes up amongst the other 10 was Herod. And let me explain that. The 10 horns belong to the Roman beast. A horn is a power. It's a region. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cognitions much trouble me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. So the heads of the beast represent the whole kingdom as a whole. The horns are the powers or the regions within that kingdom. As with Alexander, he was 1 horn that breaks into 4 horns. And the empire of Alexander was broken up into 4 regions and had 4 kings or royal families ruling those areas. The power being the king or the regent that rules that region. The crowns are kings that have ruled within the empire. So the ram has 2 horns. This is the kingdom of Media-Persia. And as it has 2 ruling powers within its empire, or 2 powerful regions. So in Daniel 7:3 says, Then I lifted up mine eyes, and I saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. So the kingdom of Persia was larger, stronger, and came up after the Median Empire. I saw the ram pushing westwards and northwards and southwards, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So the horn was Alexander the Great. He was very powerful, and his empire was very short-lived, but it was very fast. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him with fury of his power. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great towards the south, and towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. And where did we hear that? That's the tail of the dragon taking a third of the stars of heaven and swiping them to the ground. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto the certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgressions of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So Media-Persia fell. It was still there, obviously, but it was no longer ruled by the Medes or the Persians. It was ruled by Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great fell, his region was separated into four, and the kings of those regions ruled over Media and Persia. As before, Media-Persia had conquered Babylon, and they ruled over Babylon. And so the little horn that comes up amongst the four kingdoms. So it's telling us here that this little stout horn or power is coming up amongst the kingdoms of Greece. So the kingdom of Alexander was divided into four regions, and they were ruled by four royal families. The Cassander, Lysimachus, the Seleucids, and the Ptolemies. And probably the Ptolemies are the most famous because we know them for Queen Cleopatra. And if you look at the Ptolemaic Empire or dynasty, or the region that it ruled, the kingdom of Judea is part of that, and Idumea, and also Nabatea. After the Ptolemy rule, Palestine was ruled by the Seleucid Empire up until the War of Maccabees, where the Hasmonean family took control of Judea, or they were given the right to rule by their own laws. And Judea was ruled up until the takeover from Rome by the Seleucid Empire, being allowed to run under their own laws and customs. However, most of Palestine had already been Hellenized. So amongst the kingdom in the region of Judea, or Hasmonean kings of Judea, of Israel, comes Antipater the Idumean. So Antipater the Idumean was the father of King Herod the Great and the founder of the Herodian dynasty, and he came to power through his association with Julius Caesar when he defeated Pompey. So Antipater rescued Caesar in Alexandria, and he was made chief minister of Judea. And this was around the time that the region of Palestine, or it wasn't called Judea until the Romans took over, and it was the beginning of the Roman Empire, because up until then it was a constitutional republic, and after Caesar took over, it was a dictatorship, or he was called a dictator. Rome was ruled by 3 different ruling classes. As it states here, there are 3 branches of government in the Roman Republic. And I'll just read this article. From the founding of Rome in about 753 BCE until 509 BCE, Rome was a monarchy ruled by kings. In 509 or so, the Romans expelled their Etruscan kings and established the Roman Republic. Having witnessed the problems of the monarchy on their own land and oligarchy and democracy among the Greeks, the Romans opted for a mixed constitution which kept elements of all 3 types of government. Consuls, the monarchical branch. 2 magistrates called consuls carried on the functions of the former kings, holding supreme civil and military authority in Republican Rome. However, unlike the kings, the office of consul lasted for only 1 year. At the end of their year in office, the ex-consul became senators for life unless ousted by the censors. Power of the consuls. Consuls held imperium and had the right to 12 lictors or bodyguards each. Each consul could veto the other. They led the army, they served as judges, and represented Rome in foreign affairs. Consuls presided over the assembly known as Comita Centuriata. Consulship safeguards. The 1-year term veto and the consulship were safeguards to prevent one of the consuls from wielding too much power. In emergencies such as times of war, a single dictator could be appointed for a 6-month term. The Senate, the aristocratic branch, senatus, a council of elders related to the word senior, was the advisory branch of the Roman government. Early on, composed of about 300 citizens who served for life. They were chosen by the kings at first, then by the councils, and by the end of the 4th century, by the censors. The ranks of the Senate drawn from ex-consuls and other officers. Property requirements changed with the era. At first, senators were only patricians, but in time, plebeians joined their ranks. Assembly, the democratic branch. The Assembly of Centuries, which was composed of all members of the army, elected consuls annually. The Assembly of Tribes, composed of all citizens, approved or rejected laws and decided issues of war and peace. The dictator, sometimes dictators, were at the head of the Roman Republic. Between 501 and 202 BCE, there were 85 such appointments. Normally, dictators served for 6 months and acted with the consent of the Senate. They were appointed by the consul or a military tribune with consular powers. The occasions of their appointment included war, sedition, pestilence, and sometimes for religious reasons. And with that in mind, the current situation of the last 2 years we've seen ourselves in has seen the rise of a lot of dictators, and it makes you wonder if this system is still running in the underbelly of how our politics work. Obviously, our politics is based on this Roman system, but, in times of pestilence, all the dictators come to the forefront. Dictator for life. In 82 BCE, after several battles and rebellions among the civil war, Lucius Cornelius, or Sulla Felix, named himself dictator for as long as necessary, the first in 120 years. He stepped down in 79. In 45 BCE, the politician Julius Caesar was officially appointed dictator in perpetuo, meaning that there was no set end point to his dominance, but he was assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BCE. While Caesar's death did not mean the end of the Roman Republic, the Gracchi brothers brought several reforms to the country in the process, starting a revolution. The Republic fell in 30 BCE. So Julius Caesar was the beginning of the fall of the Roman Republic, and his son was the first emperor of Rome. So he was also the end of the Ptolemaic, the Seleucid, and other empires as superpowers of the earth at the time. So we see this little horn rising up on the goat, amongst the horns of the goat. So we've got the goat picture here with Thrace, Macedonia, Syria, and Egypt, which are the four main regions of the areas that were ruled initially by Alexander the Great. And if we look at Antipater, he rises up amongst these empires, and he was the founder of the Herodian Empire, the Hasmonean kings who were ruled by the Ptolemy family, or in their region. And then the story of Daniel changes. So the story of the goat, or the he-goat, is in Daniel 8. Verse 22, now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it. For 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So neither of the 4 kingdoms were as powerful as Alexander. And in the later time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. So the Herods are mighty, but they're not by their own power, because they are given power by Rome. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And who destroyed the mighty and holy people of God? Who destroyed the temple and the last of the Hasmonean princes who were the rightful heirs to the throne of Judea? It was the Idumean King Herod the Great. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes, who is Jesus, but he shall be broken without hand. So this is the goat kingdom. This is the Greek kingdom. But if we go back to Daniel 7, when he's talking about all 4 beasts, we also see that the little horn comes up amongst the Roman beast. So verse 23, and he said, thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of the kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. And another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and to think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven. So verse 7, after this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts and that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So the terrible beast has 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And so we have this Grecian Empire of the little horn, and we have the Roman Empire, the little horn, and, the Herodian kingdom rising at the end of the Grecian kingdom and at the beginning of the Roman kingdom. And why was the little horn, or little power, coming up amongst the 4 horns, and then secondly the 10 horns of the beast of Rome? And that's because the beast that it was on gave it the power and its authority. It gave the beast of the goat gave the power to the Herods, and the beast of Rome gave the Herods their right to rule the land of Judea. So Herod the Great was appointed governor of Galilee by his father Antipater. And so Antipater gained the power from the Ptolemies and the Hasmoneans. So Antipater in 48 BC. Father poisoned in 43 BC. 40 BC, Antonius the Hasmonean, with support of the Parthians, defeated Herod. Herod fled to Rome, gained support of the Senate, who declared him to be king of the Jews. So this was the rising of the power of Rome over the whole earth. And they gave Herod the power to rule. In 37 BC, Romans executed Antonius and Herod took control of Jerusalem. Herod reigned for 34 years, died in Jericho. Herodians culturally were Hellenistic, so the Hellenistic Greek people were ruling Judea. They were ruling Israel before it became Romanized. So, Antipater the Idumean was the founder of the Herodian dynasty and father of Herod the Great. According to Josephus, he was the son of Antipas and had formerly held that name. When Julius Caesar defeated Pompey, Antipater rescued Caesar in Alexandria and was made chief minister of Judea, as Judah became known to the Romans with the right to collect taxes. And it's always about the taxes, isn't it? Antipater eventually made his son Phasaelus and Herod the governors of Jerusalem and Galilee, respectively, and after the assassination of Caesar, Antipater was forced to side with Gaius Cassius Longinus against Mark Antony. The pro-Roman politics of Antipater led to his increasing unpopularity among the devout, non-Hellenized Jews. He died by poison. So the prophecy of Daniel was explaining the political powers up to and at the end of the time of the Messiah. The coming of his kingdom and the final days of the kingdom of Israel that was under the first covenant with God. That was the Mosaic covenant. And Daniel was shown a vision of the future of how it was all going to unfold for his people. The book of Daniel was fulfilled by Jesus and his resurrection. Then we have the book of Revelation to John. And that is to the new kingdom of Israel that was established by Jesus, the new heavens, the new earth. So the book of Revelation was talking about the beast that would be in power of the time of the new Israel, the new covenant that Jesus brought between the new heaven and the new earth, and the political trials that they would have to go through from the first resurrection of the saints at the time of Jesus up until the second resurrection at the end of the little season of Satan. So we have the picture in Revelation of three beasts in Revelation. The beasts that we have in Revelation are the beast of the sea, the dragon, and the beast of the earth. And these aren't unrelated to the beast of Daniel, but they are not the beast of Daniel because they're for our time. Or maybe not necessarily our time, but for the period of time since the resurrection of Jesus until the end of the little season of Satan, when Jesus returns and the graves are opened and the second resurrection happens. So in Revelation 20, and I saw an angel come down from heaven having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up, and set a seal upon him that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loose a little season. So we see that the dragon isn't killed. He's been restrained. And if we look at the bottomless pit, it translates to a place of no knowledge. In the Strong's translation, abusos, boundless, bottomless, noun, abusos, the abyss, unfathomable depth, and especially Jewish conception, the home of the dead and evil spirits, boundless, bottomless. So in classic Greek, an adjective equivalent to bottomless, so perhaps unbounded, the immeasurable depth, the abyss, hence of a deep sea, or orcus, a deep gulf or chasm, the lowest parts of the earth. So the abyss, from the Greek word abyssos, meaning exceedingly deep or unfathomable, boundless. It is used in the Christian Greek scriptures to refer to a place or condition of confinement. It includes the grave, but not limited to it. So in our English Bibles, the Greek word abyssos, abuso, is translated as abyss. In every instant except Romans 10:7, where it is translated the deep, in the Septuagint abyssos, abuso, translated tihom, almost exclusively, but in rare instances, shulam, meshulam, and racha. In the Old Testament, abyssos is invariably descriptive of the watery depths of the earth, whether ocean or spring, in contradistinction to the land. Although in Psalms 71:20, the depths of the earth are spoken of in a manner almost signifying death, however, this probably means no more than the depths of one's troubles on earth. Abyssos never translates Sheol, so in the Old Testament it never carries the idea of the realm of the dead or the afterlife. In Genesis 1:2, the total inchoate earth is called the deep, over which the Spirit of God hovered. During the intertestamental period, the situation began to change, and the meaning of abyssos, broadened to include the idea of death as well as the realm of demonic spirits. And I'm thinking that might be related to fables more than what it actually means. In the New Testament, the changeover is completely abyssos, is never used to refer to the waters of the earth. Here it is used in two ways. First, in Romans 10:7, Paul uses it to mean the realm of the dead, drawing from Deuteronomy 30:12 and 14, but not quoting exactly. He contrasts ascent into heaven with descent into the abyss. But because Christ was there, the abyss should not be conceived as an evil or demonic realm. 2 Luke and John describe the abyss specifically as the dwelling place of demons and the beast, and as a place of confinement into judgment that is under God's control. So it's a place where God isn't. It's a place of no light. It's a place of no knowledge. It's dark. So even the true meaning of the abyss has been changed. Anyway, the dragon is cast into this bottomless pit or abyss, or a place of no knowledge, a dark place, and it's bound for 1,000 years. So it's still there, it's still around, but it is bound to have any power or any real harm that it can unleash on the people of the earth, or God's people. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. So the Bible shows us that the first resurrection's already started. So 1,000 years. And in that time, Paul also tells us that we can become part of the first resurrection before we die. So being part of the kingdom, and the kingdom inside is being part of the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So in Hebrews 9, Paul says, the earthly sanctuary. Then indeed, even the first covenant had ordinances of divine service and the earthly sanctuary. For a tabernacle was prepared, the first part, in which was the lampstand, the table, and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant, overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that had the manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory, overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail. Now when these things had been thus prepared, the priest always went into the first part of the tabernacle, performing the services. But into the second part the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the people's sins committed in ignorance. The Holy Spirit indicating this, that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while the first tabernacle was still standing. It was symbolic for the present time, in which both gifts and sacrifices are offered, which cannot make him who performs the service perfect in regard to the conscience, and concerned only with food and drink, various washings and fleshly ordinances imposed until the time of Reformation. But Christ came as high priest of good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made of hands, that is not of his creation, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood. He entered the most holy place once for all, having ordained eternal redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctifies for the purifying of flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from the dead works to serve the living God? And for this reason he is mediator of the new covenant by means of death, of redemption and transgressions under the first covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance. For where is the testament that must also of necessity be the death of the tester? For the testament is in force after men are dead, since it has no power at all while the tester lives. Therefore, not even the first covenant was dedicated without blood. For when Moses had spoken every precept to all people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water, scarlet wool, and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, This is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you. Then likewise he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry, and according to the law almost all things are purified with blood. Without shedding of blood there is no remission. Therefore it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has not entered the holy place made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood of another. He then should have had to suffer often since the foundations of the world. But now once, at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin in the sacrifice of himself, and is the appointed for men to die once, but after this judgment, so Christ is offered once to bear the sins of many. To those who eagerly wait for him, he will appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. So this is showing that it was Jesus who entered the holy place and he caused the sacrifice to end. You know, this is the ending of the prophecy of Daniel, and Jesus did that. So 1 Corinthians 15 Paul talks about the first fruits, and but in fact Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. So those who have fallen asleep are those who have died. For as by a man came death, by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive, but each in his own order. Christ, the first fruits, then at his coming those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, and after destroying every rule and every authority and every power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. For God has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when it says all things are put in subjection, it is plain that he is expected who put all things in subjection under him. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things in subjection under him, that God may be all in all. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached unto you, which also ye have received, and wherein ye stand, by which also ye are saved, if ye keep in memory what I preached unto you, unless ye have believed in vain. For I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he was seen by Caiaphas, then of the 12. After that he was seen of above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep. After that he was seen of James, then of all the apostles. And last of all he was seen of me also, as of one born out of due time. For I am the least of the apostles, that am not meant to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain, but I laboured more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was within me. Therefore, whether it were I or they, so we preached, and so ye believed. Now if Christ be preached that he rose from the dead, how say some among you that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there be no resurrection of the dead, then is Christ not risen? And if Christ be not risen, then is our preaching in vain, and your faith is also vain. Yea, and we are found false witnesses of God, because we have testified of God that he raised up Christ, whom he raised not up. If so, be that the dead rise not. For if the dead rise not, then it is not Christ raised. And if Christ be not raised, your faith is vain. Ye are yet in your sins. Then also which are fallen asleep in Christ are perished. If in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most miserable. But now is Christ risen from the dead, and become the first fruits of them that slept. For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. But every man in his own order, Christ the first fruits, afterwards they that are Christ in his coming. Then cometh the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and power. For he must reign till he hath put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. For he hath put all things under his feet, but when he saith all things are put under him, it is manifest that he is accepted which did not put all things under him. And when all things shall be subdued unto him, then shall the Son also himself be subject to him that put all things under him, that God may be all in all. Else what shall they do which are baptized for the dead, if the dead rise not at all? Why are they then baptized for the dead? And why stand we in jeopardy every hour? I protest by your rejoicing which I have in Christ Jesus our Lord, I die daily. If after the manner of men I have fought with beasts at Ephesus, what advantageth it me? if the dead rise not. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Be not deceived, evil communications corrupt good manners. Awake to righteousness and sin not, for some have not the knowledge of God. I speak this to your shame. But some men will say, how are the dead raised up, and with what body do they come? Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened, except to die. And that which is soweth, thou soweth not that body that shall be, but bare grain it may chance of wheat, or of some other grain. But God giveth it a body, as it hath pleased him, and to every seed his own body. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, and another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. There are also celestial bodies, and bodies terrestrial. But the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for one star differeth from another star in glory. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. And so it is written, the first man Adam was made a living soul, the last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Howbeit that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural, and afterward that which is spiritual. The first man is of the earth, earthy, the second man is the Lord from heaven. As is the earthy, such are they also that are earthy, and as is the heavenly, such are they also that are heavenly. And as we have borne the image of the earthy, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither do corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must be put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass his saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. Thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labour is not in vain and in the Lord. Let's not forget that this was written before the fall of Jerusalem in 66-70 AD, and potentially the coming of the armies in the clouds of heaven. And he's talking about those that have fallen asleep. After that, he was seen of above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep. And the other scripture we were reading was about those that have fallen asleep in Christ, the first fruits. So just because our earthly body, our corruptible body dies, as Paul says, our earthly body has been sown in corruption. It doesn't mean that our spiritual body can't inherit the kingdom now. So going back to Revelation 20 says, and I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them, and I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death have no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. So he is released from his chains, and out of this abyss, this place of no knowledge, and out of darkness. And he shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up upon the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. So the beast, at this point in time, the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth are already in the lake of fire. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth had and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and the death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. That is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. If the dragon is in Revelation 12, persecuting the woman, persecuting the child, the Messiah child in the beginning, then how is the dragon still here 1,000 years later, when it's released from its chains, is given free reign over the earth again? And I believe that's because the dragon is a beast that existed in the time of Jesus, and it will exist again in the time of the end. And if we are in the little season of Satan, we are in the time of the end. And we will see that this empire of the dragon that existed in the time of Jesus still exists today and has been given free reign over the earth. So the three beasts of Revelation, John's Revelation, are the dragon, which we've explained previously, the beast of the sea. And I stood in the sand of the sea, and the beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy. And a lot of people get this beast confused with the dragon, or also confused with the beast of Daniel. There's no little horn on these beasts, because the little horn has become the dragon. And the beast which I saw like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So the first beast in Daniel didn't have authority or power from the dragon. This beast of the sea is an amalgamation of the beasts of Daniel. So we have, it was like unto a leopard, which is Alexander the Great's Greece, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, which is the Medo-Persians. It had the mouth of a lion of Babylon, and the dragon gave this beast its power now. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Now, that being said, it's saying they worshipped the dragon. At the time of the unchaining of the dragon, these beasts were in the lake of fire. In Revelation 20, if we remember, it says that fire came down from God and out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are. So they're already in the lake of fire at this stage. So if the dragon is bound, then how is it that the dragon is still here giving power to the beasts? And that's because the dragon isn't dead. The dragon's just bound. It has no power of its own. And I'll explain this in another video about where the dragon is in today's world and how it got there. But for today, I'm just explaining how the dragon is the Herod dynasty. So, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. So this beast has 2 powers, or 2 empires that are amalgamated into one. And it gets its power from the dragon as well, because it speaks like a dragon. And it exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he does great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. So we have the first resurrection of the first fruits in Matthew 27, with Jesus giving up the ghost. Jesus, when he cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And the saints' resurrection, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. And we are constantly part of this harvest, the first fruits and the seasons. We are being harvested as fruits in the harvest of the kingdom. But those who are not part of the kingdom will be dead, and those that die will remain asleep until the second resurrection, where they'll be raised to judgment. And the books are open, and we're all judged to life or to eternal death. So how can we see the empire of the dragon, or the red dragon? It's a red dragon, which red is the word that is used is Edom, in the empire of the Herods. If we go to Revelation, we see a picture of the great red dragon, the word red used in Revelation, puros, fiery red. But we know that's in Greek. We know that the word red in Hebrew is Adam or Edom, which is ruddy or red. So as it is written, Jacob I have loved, and Esau have I hated. Esau, nicknamed Edom, meaning red, did not care about his God-given covenant, contract, birthright, so he sold it cheap for a bowl of porridge. So this red dragon has 7 heads. So the dragon has 7 heads, and now the beast of the sea also has 7 heads. So there's 7 parts of the same empire or the same dynasty. So how did the Herods have 7 heads? Well, we have Antipater II, the Idumean, who was the founder of the Herodian dynasty. He was the first head. Second head was King Herod the Great. He had his 3 sons who were the tetrarchs, Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Herod Philip. That made 5 heads. Number 6 was Agrippa I, and number 7 was Agrippa II. And all of these powers or heads were given to them by the Roman Empire, or the beast of Daniel, the Roman beast of Daniel. And they ruled Judea. Herod Antipater ruled Judea in the name of the Caesars. King Herod the Great ruled Judea in the name of the Caesars. Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Herod Philip were all tetrarchs ruling Judea in the name of the Caesars. And Agrippa I and Agrippa II, who was the final ruler of Judea under Roman authority. There were 10 regions this empire were given to rule by Rome. So the dragon was given Judea, Idumea, Samaria, Perea, Decapolis, Galilee, Galantis, Armenia Minor, and Cilicia. And they were all regions of the Roman Empire that the Herods were given rule over by the Emperor of Rome. The 7 crowns were 7 kings of the Herodian dynasty. So not all Herods were kings. So King Herod the Great was a king of the Herodian dynasty. But the tetrarch rulers or ethnarchs were Archelaus, Antipas, and Philip were not kings. King Herod Agrippa the First was a king. King Herod Agrippa II was a king. Herod, king of Chalcis, or Armenia, was a king. Herod, king of Cilicia, was a king. Aristobulus of Armenia Minor, who was married to Salome of the John the Baptist dance, and Tigranes the Sixth of Armenia. They were all kings. There were 7 crowns that were held by Herodian kings. So the end of the Judean rule of the Herods finished with Agrippa II. However, the Herod rule within the Roman Empire continued in other provinces of Armenia and Armenia Minor and Cilicia. And so this Herod dragon still existed within the Roman Empire, but its power had been taken away to rule Judea and God's people. And this brings us to Revelation 2:12. And the angel of the church of Pergamos write, "These things saith he which hath the sharp sword with 2 edges. I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. And thou holdest fast my name, and thou hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you where Satan dwelleth." And this is a revelation to John. John was one of the last apostles to die, or was the last apostle to die. And this is a letter to the church in Pergamon. And why did Satan's seat dwell in Pergamum? If this was referencing the dragon who persecuted the church as it persecuted the Messiah, we would know why. And at the time John wrote the book of Revelation, the dragon was no longer ruling in Judea, but it was ruling in Pergamon. So Tigranes the Sixth of Armenia, also known as Tigran the Sixth, or by his Roman name Gaius Julius Tigranes. And we can see they're using these Roman names to disguise who they are, was a Herodian prince and served as a Roman client king of Armenia in the 1st century. He was the child born to Alexander by an unnamed wife. His mother was a noblewoman that flourished in the reigns of the first 2 Roman emperors, Augustus and Tiberius. He was the namesake of his parental uncle Tigranes V, who served as previous king of Armenia during the reign of Augustus. His father's parents were Alexander and Glaphyra. Tigranes appears to be the only grandchild born to his paternal grandparents. His parental grandfather Alexander was a Judean prince of Jewish, Nabatean, and Edomite descent and was the son of King of Judea Herod the Great and his wife Mariamne. His parental grandmother, Glaphyra, was a Cappadocian princess of Greek, Armenian, and Persian descent. She was the daughter of the king Archelaus of Cappadocia, but her mother was an unnamed princess from Armenia, possibly a relation of the Artaxid dynasty. Tigranes' name is a reflection of his Armenian and Hellenic lineage. The name Tigranes was the most common royal name in the Atraxid dynasty and was almost among the most ancient names of the Armenian kings. Josephus states that his ancestral line had been kings of Armenia. Like his father and paternal uncle, Tigranes was an apostate to Judaism. It's unlikely that Tigranes attempted to exert influence on Judean politics. Little is known of Tigranes' life prior to becoming king of Armenia. Tigranes was raised in Rome. His long residency in Rome became to slave-like docility. Tigranes married a noblewoman from central Anatolia called Opgali. Opgali was a Phrygian woman who may have been a Hellenic Jew. His wife is only known through surviving numismatic evidence from his kingship. And his child was Gaius Julius Alexander, was a Herodian prince who lived in the 1st century and 2nd century in the Roman Empire. So he was the son of Tigranes. Alexander was of Jewish, Nabatean, Edomite, Greek, Armenian, and Persian ancestry. He was a son of the Herodian prince, later King Tigranes VI of Armenia, and his wife Opgali. In the spring of 58, his father was crowned as King of Armenia by Roman Emperor Nero in Rome and ruled until 63. So if he was living in Rome at the time his father and Nero crowned him, is it possible that he was well known to Nero and his wife Poppaea? I wonder. Alexander had a sister called Julia who married the Anatolian Roman senator Marcus Plentius Varus. Gaius Julius Agrippa was a Cilician prince and the firstborn son of Gaius Julius Alexander and Queen Julia Iotapa of Cetus. He had 2 younger siblings, a brother called Gaius Julius Alexander Berenicanus, and his sister Julia. Surviving inscriptions on his family reveal that his family were related to important members of Asian non-Jewish and Jewish aristocracy. He was the Jewish, Nabatean, Edomite, Greek, Armenian, Medes, and Persian origins. His paternal grandparents were King Tigranes VI of Armenia and his wife Opgali, though through Tigranes he was a descent of King Archelaus of Cappadocia. King of Judea, Herod the Great and his wife Mariamne, Agrippa, along with his family and paternal relatives, were among the least known descendants of the Herodian dynasty. He was an apostate to Judaism. It is unlikely that Agrippa attempted to exert influence on Judean politics. His name indicates that the family connections from the Herodian dynasty were not wholly broken. His maternal grandparents were King Antiochus IV of Commagene and Queen Julia Otypia. The kingdom of Cetus was a small client state in the Roman Empire. Cetus was a small region in Cilicia that was previously ruled by his Cappadocian royal ancestors and Antiochus IV. So let's check out Cilicia. And Cilicia is a geocultural region in southern Anatolia, Turkey, extended inland from the northeast coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Cilicia has a population ranging over 6 million, that's today. So this is the region of Cilicia here. And we have this region of the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia, Little Armenia. And this is where Salome and her husband ruled from, Little or Armenia Minor. And also she had 3 sons that disappear from history, although not from reality. They may not be able to be traced, but they could have gone anywhere in the aristocratic world, I guess you could say. So we have Pergamum over here in Turkey. It's up a bit further north here. But when we go look at the Herod kings, We have Gaius Julius Alexander. Again, Tigranes had arranged with King Antiochus IV of Commagene, with whom he was an ally, for the marriage of Alexander to Antiochus' daughter Julia Iotapa. The betrothal was held in Rome after Tigranes' coronation. After the betrothal, Nero crowned Alexander and Iotapa as Roman client rulers of the small Cilician region of Cetus, which had previously been ruled by Alexander's Seleucid ancestors. Then by Archelaus of Cappadocia, and then by Archelaus of Cilicia, and Antiochus IV, the Cilician city of Eleusa, Sebasti, was made a part of the kingdom. Alexander and Iotapa ruled Cetus from 58 until at least 72. Little is known about the marriage and reign of Alexander and Iotapa. Iotapa bore Alexander 3 children, 2 sons, Gaius Julius Agrippa, Gaius Julius Alexander, Bernicanius, and daughter Julia Iotapa. Their children were born and raised in Cetus. A possible descendant from their marriage was the usurper Jotapanus, who lived in the 3rd century. His name and the names Alexander gave his sons indicate that their family connections with the Herodian dynasty were not wholly broken. Later in his life, Alexander had entered the Roman Senate and served as a suffect consul in 116. So we've got these Herods entering the Roman Senate. They're in positions of power. We've got Tigranes, and they're showing relationships with Nero as friends, and they wonder how Nero's wife Poppaea had any connection to Judaism. Well, it's there in spades. All of their friends and surrounding people, or the surrounding Herods within their empire, were more than likely influential on them. Now I need to find out more about Julia Iotapa and Iotapa and this kingdom of Cetus. So it was the kingdom of Armenia where these Herods were left the realm to once Judea fell. And if we look at Gaius Julius Alexander, Plancia Magna, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but she was a prominent woman of Perga in Roman province of Lycia et Pamphylia, who lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries. During her life, she was not only a high priestess, but a member of the Decurio and benefactress to the city, funding the restorations of the main city gates between the years of AD 119 and 120. Plancia Magna was the daughter of Roman Senator Marcus Plentius Varus and the Herodian princess Julia, daughter of Tigranes VI of Armenia. Her mother became a priestess and served in the temple of the ancient Greek goddess Artemis in Perga. So we have the daughter of a Herod. I think she was King Herod the Great's granddaughter, serving in the temple of Artemis in the city of Perga. Magna married a Roman senator, Gaius Julius Cornutus Tertullus, suffect consul in 100 with his friend Pliny the Younger. Magna bore Tertullus a son, Gaius Julius Plancius Varus Cornutus. So, the granddaughter of King Herod the Great great-granddaughter of Herod the Great was priestess in the temple of Artemis in the city of Perga. Artemis is the daughter of Zeus and Leto and the twin sister of Apollo. She was the patron and protector of young children and women. and was believed to both bring disease upon women and children and relieve them of it. The mother goddess. So we have Planka. Julia, daughter of Tigranes VI of Armenia, was a Herodian princess. This is Planka's mother, Plancia. Her mother was Julia, a Herodian princess who lived in the 1st century and possibly the 2nd century in the Roman Empire. She was a Jewish, Nabatean, Edomite, Greek, Armenian, and Persian ancestry. Julia was the daughter of the Herodian prince, later king, Tigranes VI of Armenia, and his wife, Obgali. In the spring of 58, her father was crowned as king of Armenia by Roman Emperor Nero in Rome. Her parental grandparents were Judean Prince Alexander and his unnamed wife. Through her father, Julia was a great-granddaughter of Cappadocian Princess Glafra and Judean Prince Alexander. Julia was the great-great-granddaughter of King Archelaus of Cappadocia, King of Judea Herod the Great, and his wife Mariamne. Julia, along with her brother and father, were the known descendants of the kings of Cappadocia. Little is known on Julia's life. At the unknown date, Julia married Roman senator called Marcus Plentius Varus. Varus was a prominent and wealthy Roman who owned large estates in Galatia. Varus served as a proconsul in Bithynia and later in Pontus during the reign of Roman Emperor Vespasian, who ruled in Roman Empire from 69 to 79. After Varus concluded his term as proconsul, he and Julia settled in Perga, the capital of the Roman province of Pamphylia. Julia became a priestess and served in the temple of the ancient Greek goddess Artemis in Perga. Artemis was the most important goddess in Perga. Julia bore Varus 2 children who were son Gaius Plentius Varus, who became a Roman senator and served as a consul during the reign of Roman Emperor Hadrian. Gaius, like his father, became a prominent patron and prominent citizen in Perga. So we have this Herod, who's a prominent patron, prominent citizen in Perga. And is this where the seat of Satan went? Is this the seat of the dragon, and where the dragon went after Judea fell, and how the dragon continued on in the world through the Roman Empire? Gaius Julius Plancus Varus Cornutus, who was Julia and her husband's only grandchild, Plancia Magna, like her father and brother, became a prominent patron and prominent citizen in Perga. Gaius Julius Plancius Varus Cornutus was a man of Roman senatorial rank who lived in the Roman Empire in the 2nd century. So now these Herods, he's a grandchild of the original Herodian dynasty, who now looks like a Roman citizen, and you wouldn't know he was a Herod at all. Cornutus was the son of Gaius Julius Cornutus Tertullius and Plancia Magna. His paternal grandparents were proconsul and suffect of consul Gaius Julius Cornutus Tertullus and possibly Tertulla, while his maternal grandparents were Roman senator and proconsul Marcus Plancius Varus and Herodian princess Julia. His family were prominent citizens and patrons in Perga. He was of Roman, Jewish, Nabatean, Edomite, Greek, Armenian, and Persian ancestry. So he's like a combination of all of the empires that came before: the Roman, the Greek, the Persian, and all of their royalty, all of the beasts combined. He was, Cornutus' ancestors were King Archelaus of Cappadocia, King of Judea Herod the Great, and his wife Mariamne. Cornutus, along with his mother's maternal uncle Gaius Plancus Varus and his maternal relatives, were among the last known descendants of the Herodian dynasty. Now, I can't prove this, but, you know, with the Herodian trait of marrying in the family, How do we know that his father, this Gaius Julius Cornutus Tertullus, wasn't a Herod as well? You know, King Herod the Great, or his father had a son called Phasaelus, and he also had a sister called Salome, and they had children, and their children had children, and they were all Roman citizens and potentially used Roman names, and we have no way of knowing who they were, who they married. There's just no record of the history there that goes that deep. But this guy could have been a Herod as well. It says he was a Roman senator, and he was best known as the older friend of Pliny the Younger. How Cornutus is related to other known Romans in his time is unclear. Older authorities note that one inscription that preserves his full name is missing the middle of the relevant line, and conclude from the name of his son Gaius Julius Plentius Varus Cornutus that Cornutus' family name may be Gaius Julius Plentius Varus Cornutus Tertullus. This would imply that he is somehow related to Marcus Plentius Varus, a citizen of Perga, who was proconsular governor of Bithynia and Pontus. Further, at least one authority believes Julia Tertulla is his daughter. However, Julia Tertulla married Lucius Julius Marianus Caecilius Simplex, who was suffect consul in 101, which indicates either Julia was married at a very young age or would be better considered Cornutus' sister. Further, Oli Salome's report an unpublished inscription that proves Cornutus' wife was Plancia Magna, which explains how that element entered their son's name and the full name of their son. Julia of Cilicia, Julia Eotapa Julia Eotape, sometimes known as Julia of Cilicia, was a Cilician princess who lived in the 1st century and 2nd century, so we might as well just say an Armenian princess. Daughter of King Gaius Julius Alexander of Cetus, she married Gaius Julius Quadratus Bassus, Galatian Roman senator from Anatolia. Julia Eotapa was the daughter of King Gaius Julius Alexander and Queen Julia Eotapa of Cetus. Her elder brothers were Gaius Julius Agrippa and Gaius Julius Alexander Bernicanus. She was born, raised, and educated in Cetus. She was Plancia Magna. It's strange because Wikipedia is not linking her to this person. Perhaps this is her daughter. So we've got Julia of Sicilia. Gaius Julius Quadratus Bassus was born in Pergamon to a family related to the Attalid dynasty and the Galatian tetrarchs. His father was Gaius Julius Bassus, who was a proconsul of Bithynia. He is known to have had at least one son, Gaius Julius Bassus, who was suffect consul in 139. So we have this guy, Gaius Plentius Varus, who was a Roman who lived between the 1st century and 2nd century in the Roman Empire. Varus was the son of Roman senator and proconsul Marcus Plentius Varus and the Herodian princess Julia. His sister was Plancia Magna. He was therefore the maternal uncle to Gaius Julius Plentius Varus Cornutus. Varus was born and raised in Perga and the capital of Roman province of Pamphylia. His maternal grandparents were King Tigranes VI of Armenia and his wife Abdala. Varus served as a Roman senator and became a consul at the unknown date during the reign of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who ruled from the Roman Empire from 117 to 138. It is unknown whether Varus had married or had any children. In Perga, the city's most magnificent structure was the Hellenistic Gate. That was the entrance to the city. Inside the courtyard of the Hellenistic Gate, there are inscribed bases of statues that bear the names of Varus and his father. From these inscriptions, it is understood that Varus and his father were wealthy, influential, and generous citizens in Perga. Varus and his father were made benefactors who contributed to the prosperity of Perga. Due to the goodness and generosity of Varus and his father, they were both accepted as second founders of the city. They were both honored with the title Tistis, or founder. So Julia, the priestess of Artemis in Perga, or Plancia Magna, mother of Gaius Plancius Varus, brother of Plancia Magna, high priestess of Artemis in Perga. So the mother was the priestess of Artemis in Perga. The sister was the high priestess of Artemis in Perga. And then we have this guy, Aulus Julius Claudius Charax. His father was Gaius Julius Lupus Titus Vibius Varus Laevilus. His wife was Julia Quadratilla Bassa. She was the daughter of Gaius Julius Quadratus Bassus the first and Julia Iotapa. So she's a Herod. Julia Iotapa was born in Lazio, Italy. So she was the daughter of Gaius Julius Alexander, king of Cetus, whose father was King Tigranes VI of Armenia, the great-grandson of Herod. And so Julia Iotapa married and had Julia Quadratilla Bassa was her daughter, and her son was this person, Aulus Julius Claudius Charax, and he's a Herod. I don't know on his father's side because I can't prove that they were related to Herods from that side, but as I said, they all like to marry in the family, so who knows. But he was, according to Wikipedia, a Roman senator and historian of the 2nd century AD who held a number of offices in the emperor's service. He served as a suffect consul for the Nundinium, April to June 147, with Quintus Facius Cornutus as a colleague or a relation. Charax wrote the history Hellenica in 40 books, of which only fragments survive. The Cursus Honorum for Charax is partly known from a Greek inscription erected in Pergamon. Inscriptions from elsewhere in Asia Minor and Greece provide other details of his life. So he was... Bernard Remy, in his monograph on his fasti in Roman officials of the province of Asia Minor, suggests that while travelling through the eastern provinces, the Emperor Hadrian met Charax. There is an ample evidence that Charax was very wealthy. His possessions included a large tile factory. Being respectably wealthy and a cultured man, he obviously appealed to the Hellenophile emperor, who decided to facilitate the latter's election as quaestor. So this man wasn't only rich, he was a descendant of all of the royal families of the beast empires. This office enrolled him in the Senate. The inscription from Pergamum attests Charax discharged this office in the public province of Sicily. Then adds the puzzling note that he was ad-lected inter aedilicios, can't pronounce that, or as an aedile, which makes better sense if Charax had skipped the office of quaestor. Remy suggests that the person who wrote the inscription may have been confused about the details of Charax's ad-election. Anthony Burley suggests that this could indicate some special role for the Senate at the time of Antonius' accession. In any case, after this event, Charax advanced to the office of praetor, after which he held a series of promotions at what Remy describes as a very fast rate. He was appointed curator of the Via Latina Geza. Alfoldi dates this office from about the years 138 to about 141. This was followed immediately by Legatus Legionis, or commander of Legio II Augusta, which was stationed in Roman Britain. Alfoldi dates this commission from about 141 to around 144. During these years, the legion was involved with the campaigns of Governor Quintus Lollius Urbisus in Scotland and with the building of the Antonine Wall. This was followed by governorship of Cilicia, which Alfoldi dates from immediately after Charax left his commission to around the time of his consulship. It is possible that Charax was consul in absentia. Here the information on the Pergamon inscription ends, indicating it was inscribed shortly after Charax's consulate. Details from other inscriptions now come to play. He constructed his own at his own expense the vestibule for the Asclepion in Pergamon. Another inscription from Sparta attests he was an eponymous patrimonus around the middle of the 2nd century. This was a position that was sometimes held by distinguished foreigners. Okay, so according to this website, I can't find anything else on it except for this particular information here. My favorite planet. Don't know what that is. The Asclepian. So who was Asclepius first? So Asclepius is a hero and god of medicine in the ancient Greek religion and mythology. He is the son of Apollo and Coronis, or Arsinoe, or of Apollo alone. Asclepius represents the healing aspect of the medicinal arts. His daughters are Hygeia. He's the god of medicine. We have his rod here, which is used on our medical symbols. Although I think a lot of the ones today we have are this one with the double snake, the double helix. And that comes from the worship of Asclepius. This temple of Asclepius, or the Asclepion, is an archaeological site. It's in Turkey, Pergamon. The Asclepian was an ancient healing and cult center sacred to Asclepius, the Greek god of healing and the son of Apollo. Approached by a sacred way, the Via Tecta, the sanctuary continued a round temple of Asclepius, named Asclepius Sota, or Zeus Sota Asclepius, as well as one of his sons, the mysterious hooded youth Telesphorus. There was also a spring of slightly radioactive water used for therapeutic purpose, a library, and a small theatre. The cult of Asclepius had a mysterious and mystical association with snakes, as did those of the other Greek gods such as Athena, many of which were kept at the sanctuary. Therapy at the center included the interpretation of dreams. You can see the types of medical instruments used in antiquity in the photo below. The Asclepion is thought to have been found in the 4th century BC by a certain Archias, who is said to have brought the Esclepian Cult from its main center at Epidaurus in the northwest Peloponnese. Eumenes II elevated the cult to a state religion. So that's quite apt for today, where we have the state and world religion of Asclepian that we're experiencing today. Further enchantments were made to the healing center by Roman emperors, including Hadrian, who supported and financed building works at the Asclepian. He is thought to have visited Pergamon during his travels through Asia Minor in 123 AD. The spread of the cult of Asclepian and the establishment of such healing centers around the Greek world from the late classical period had important practical aspects. The presence of the Asclepian in an ancient city was the equivalent of a modern hospital for the citizens. It was also a source of prestige as well as a considerable income, particularly in the case of Epidaurus and Pergamon, to which rich people came from afar afield to be cured, and in return paid or donated as a religious offering large sums of money and other gifts. Several locations since the time immemorial had been thought of as especially beneficial for the treatment of disease due to the particular local properties such as their waters and the traditional associations they had acquired with deities, nymphs and other supernatural beings. With this sufficient advancement of medical theories in classical and Hellenistic times, the practice of medicine began to be systematized and standardized to a certain extent, and one could speak of a medical industry. The profession of medicine at these centers was a male preserve, and it seems no accident that other healing deities such as the health goddess Hygeia came to be seen as subservient sons and daughters to Asclepius, who became the exemplary and primary divine master and patron of the healing arts. The new medical science of Hippocrates and the cult of Asclepius in many places replaced a more ancient local ways. The Asclepian was excavated in 1927 by German archaeologist Theodor Wiegand, who also discovered the arsenal on the Pergamon Acropolis. So this is the Asclepian. And I remember seeing a documentary about this, and the slightly radioactive waters were actually poisonous, would give off poisonous gases. The sanctuary took its present form, allowing a series of renovations, particularly during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. A large quadrangular courtyard, approximately 130 by 110 meters, bounded on three sides, north, south and west, by staios, colonnaded walkways. The entrance was on the east side at the end of the Via Tecta from the city. Along the east side were a number of monumental buildings, including, from the north to south, a library of propylon entrance gateways, the round temple of Zeus Asclepius, and a large treatment center with a circular core 18 meters in diameter. Within the quadrangle itself stood the older temple of Asclepius Sota, Savior, Sota meaning Savior, and two smaller temples for Apollo and Hygeia, sleeping rooms for patients, gardens, fountains, and pools built around three sacred springs. These were connected to the treatment center by the Cryptoporticus, a 70-meter long underground vaulted tunnel. Another long stoa, built during the Hellenistic period, ran westward from outside the west side of the quadrangle. The Roman period theatre also stood outside the quadrangle. Its scaein, or stage building, stood behind the back wall of the north stoa. A marble statue of Emperor Hadrian found in the library of the Pergamon Asclepian. So this is what's interesting to us. Remains of an inscribed marble Clypeus shield on the broken tympanum of the east pediment of the north hall of the propylon, the monumental gateway of the Pergamon Asclepian. The inscription is a dedication by Aulus Claudius Carax of Pergamon, circa 115 after 147 AD, who was a priest at the sanctuary and financed the building of the propylon. So Carax or Charax was a priest of the temple of Asclepian. So this Herod descendant of King Herod the dragon, was a priest of the temple of Asclepian. So I'm just going to read this about the Asclepian. Of gods and dreams, the ancient healing sanctuary of Epidurus. In the 4th century BC, the injured and infirm had a choice of 2 different treatment paths to follow when seeking comfort, care, and a return to good health. They could go to the temple of healing or a healing sanctuary, such as the Asclepian at Epidurus, and pursue a traditional faith-based cure through worship, sacrifices, and the dedication of votive objects to Apollo, Artemis, Asclepius, Hygeia, and other health gods. Or they could approach a Hippocratic physician who offered practical science-based treatments involving therapeutic herbs and other medicinal curatives. Asclepius, a god of healing, was a relatively new face among the divine patrons of health, although he had already appeared in Homer's Iliad, late 8th, early 7th century BC. Asclepius' cult emerged more clearly in the 6th and 5th, and especially the 4th century BC. He was perceived as a more approachable god concerned with the welfare of ordinary people. His sanctuaries, the Asclepia at Epidurus, Kos, Athens, Corinth, Pergamon, and many other places, became refuge for the ill, places of hope and reassurance where priests guided them through rituals of purification and incubation, during which they spent the night in one of the sanctuary's sacred buildings and waited for the god to enter their dreams with a therapy. Later, with the increasing emphasis on real-world medical treatments, Asclepia began employing physicians who could supplement their priests' spiritual, mystical curatives with applications of tangible pharmaca. Whether through the body's own curative powers or the working of prescribed medicines, many ill visitors to Epidurus and other Asclepia appear to have been healed, as we learn from inscribed steles describing cases and miraculous cures that were publicly erected in the sanctuaries. The Asclepia became de facto hospitals, serving primarily the injured and infirmed who had been treated unsuccessfully by Hippocratic physicians or who had been turned away by such doctors during a triage process in which they would be judged to be helpless cases. The official inscriptions heralding cures combined with the testimony of patients themselves. For example, the personal memoirs, Sacred Tales of Aelius Aristides in the 2nd century AD that described his dream state encountered with Asclepius during a stay at the Asclepion of Pergamon, indicate the ailments treated in the sanctuaries range from persistent skin rashes and baldness to major internal problems such as abdominal tumors, tapeworms, and non-progressive pregnancies. In the medical approach similar to present-day integrative medicine, the Hippocratic physicians care for treatable patients and the priest's attention to the helpless meant that the full scope of infirm could receive medical assistance through what was essentially a dual but allied public health care system. Modern Jungian scholars, including C.A. Meyer and Edward Tick, have suggested that dream healing, like that at the Asclepia, represents the ancient forerunner of modern psychotherapy. According to the traveller Pausanias, was the healing god's cult statue, half as big as the Olympian Zeus at Athens, made of ivory and gold. The god is sitting on a seat grasping a staff. The other hand he is holding above the head of a serpent, where there is also a dog lying by his side. It also may have held Asclepius' sacred snakes, symbols of rebirth and rejuvenation. In some Asclepia, non-venomous snakes slithered about freely in the visitors' quarters, while the serpents at Epidurus included an odd yellowish variety were reputedly tame. At Alexandria, according to Aelian, the god snakes were gigantic, some reaching 6 to 14 cubits in length. As Asclepius' cult spread in the 5th and 3rd centuries BC, his sanctuaries came to be found in almost every Greek and Roman city or large town. They operated as both public healthcare facilities and medical teaching centers. Epidurus, the healing god's supposed birthplace, represented the Asclepian network's capital, from which a cult statue and sacred snakes were brought for. Asclepia often arose in response to health crises such as the outbreaks of plague in Athens in 430 BC and Rome in 293 BC, where sanctuaries occupied the south slope of the Asclepius. So I just want to go back to the Bible, and in Revelation 18:23 it says, "And the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride will not be heard in you any longer, for your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery." And we now know that word to be, "For the nations were deceived by your sorceries," pharmakia. So, pharmakia, the use of medicine, drugs and spells. We have in the city of Perga a temple to the god of medicine, the Asclepian, and we have a priest who's a Herod in this temple, out of his own money, building and putting money into the building of it. So this dragon, this seat of Satan, is in Pergamon. And that's where it went. It went from Judea to Pergamon to Armenia and to the Roman Empire. And it was still there. It just no longer ruled Judea. So as I asked in the first video, are we in the little season of Satan? And has the millennial reign already happened? I can't prove this point myself, but you know, everyone's entitled to their own personal beliefs, and I'm just looking at the information here. I mean, if we look at biblical eschatology and what people actually believe about the prophecies and where we're at, I mean, there's a, I guess, Christian peer review, if you want to put it that way, version of where we are, what is to be believed about where we are. But in context of what we know about history, or who's controlled history, or who has held on to the information that is important to our understanding of who we are, we can't really go on any of that. We're all in the dark with this. We are all just trying to find out the truth, going on the small amount of information that we have. And my theory, or my version of the prophecy, is just as relevant as anybody else's, going on the information that we have. So there's also some interesting factors to the possibility that we have had 1,000 years of history added to our time. And I'm just going to show a short video on that, because rather than going over and explaining it all myself, there is the times or the dates that have had the J or the I added before the date, representing in the time of Jesus or Yesu. So I'm just going to put this video on from Campbell on the Didactic channel if you want to check his channel out. But this is really good information on the possibility that we have had 1,000 years of history added to our timeline. And how would we know? How would we know? And who would do this, to be honest? And my answer is the dragon.
A lot of the information that used to be known was suddenly taken away and was hidden. History was changed, a big event happened that buried buildings. And we also have issues with our dates, and these all seem to come in again around that time frame, sort of 1700s. As you can see on this crest here, we've got a J. That's a definite J, J648, and what that stands for is J for Jesus, so it's in the year of our Lord. Well, 648 years after the year of Jesus, the year of our Lord. That's how they used to write it. And then in the 1600s, the Jesuits and Joseph Scaliger basically changed all these to a 1, making this 648 year now 1648. So you'll see a lot of these either a J or an I for Iusa, which is another way to say Jesus. You'll see here, this is actually, it's not a tombstone, it's like a mileage stone. These put them on the side of the roads to tell you how far you were from certain places. And as you can see here, this is quite clearly a J. J794. So this is saying 794 years after the death of Jesus. Okay, so not only have they stolen and changed history, they've actually added 1,000 years. 1,000 years. You can see here, that's clearly a J. 686. So we're not even living in the time frame that we believe we are. Another one, J626. This is a picture from an old book. And again, you can see we've got 656, and now this one looks more like an I than a J. But it's definitely not a 1. So I656 in the year of Isis, well, 656 years after the death of Iusa. Now this is called the King's Desk, and this is a piece of furniture that we're told was made in the 1700s, it's around the 1750s, for King Louis XV of France, I believe. And I mean, you can just see the workmanship. You know, we see a lot of this kind of furniture, and then we see a lot of cheap reproductions, people trying to reproduce this kind of stuff, and they just can't. But what's interesting about this desk is the date. The person who created this desk, apparently, or who at least signed their name to it, you'll see this J is actually dotted. J769. Okay, so there's and that's just a few examples, guys. These things are everywhere. They're on a lot of maps, a lot of old drawings, coins, pottery, things like this. So if you look into it, it's clear that 1,000 years has been added. Okay, so this J769 became 1769. They've added 1,000 years to our story. So what happened in that 1,000 years, and why was it added, and what were they trying to hide? It's also the time frame that the robber barons started to take over in the Americas. Okay, so there you go. The history that we've been told is clearly not what is going on. We're being lied to, and our history is being covered up. And so in the next episode, we're going to get into who exactly are these people who have hidden history from us and basically stolen everything for themselves and their families. And this is how they've created this generational wealth that is now making the rules, or trying to, for all the people on Earth. So thanks for spending some time with me, guys. Have a joyous day, and I shall catch you on the next upload. Bye for now.
So perhaps we have had 1,000 years of the reign of Christ, and what that may look like is not what we thought it would be. This Jehovah's Witness version of Paradise on Earth, with the paintings they would have of 1,000-year reign where, children are playing with asps and sitting with lions and all that kind of stuff. What we may have is 1,000 years of history where we have the knowledge of the Messiah. We have had the knowledge of the Son of God himself coming to earth and dying on our behalf so that he could open up a way for us to evolve as his children into a spiritual nation so we can be like him. And that was just a total pivotal point in the history of humans. And since that has happened, no time before that happened has been like ours. No time before that has had the knowledge of the Messiah, has had the Holy Spirit, has had any of these understandings of exactly who we are and exactly what God has planned for us in eternity. And it's a really big thing. Since what Jesus has done for us, we have had a complete and utter spiritual evolution. This is huge. It's just as huge as creation of Adam and Eve. We have been recreated. We are now spiritual beings. We are now spiritually alive, quickened by the Holy Spirit. And we've had, well, as we think, 2,000 years of history of understanding that and trying to grow communities and nations based on those principles. And then we have this dragon that's been chained and hasn't been able to have its way with society, with civilization, up until I found this little piece of information which may tie in with it. I don't know. I'm just saying that if we have had 1,000 years of history added to our time, then I believe it's from the fall of Jerusalem, when the stars of heaven were wiped out by the dragon's tail and cast to the earth, and that was the end of the first covenant of God with his people. And from that point on, we have the new kingdom, the new heaven and the new earth, and the new covenant. Because God and Jesus said that he gave them a generation. He gave them 40 years. Jesus died 40 years before the fall of Jerusalem. Paul said to the Romans, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." So the apostles went to the Jews first. And from the time that they crucified Jesus until the time that Jerusalem fell, they had 40 years, which was a generation. So the Julian calendar was proposed by Julius Caesar in AUC 708. I don't know what AUC means. Or 46 BC, was a reform of the Roman calendar. It took effect on the 1st of January, AUC 709 or 45 BC, by edict. It was designed with the aid of Greek mathematicians and astronomers such as Sosigenes of Alexandria. The calendar became the prominent calendar in the Roman Empire and subsequently most of the Western world for more than 1600 years, until 1582, when Pope Gregory the 13th promulgated a minor modification to reduce the average length of the year from 365.25 days to 365.2425 days, and thus corrected the Julian calendar's drift against the solar year. Worldwide adoption of the revised calendar, which became known as the Gregorian Calendar, took place over the subsequent centuries, first in Catholic countries and subsequently in Protestant countries of the Western Christian world. So the Roman general Julius Caesar entered Egypt in 48 BC and became an ally and lover of Egypt's Queen Cleopatra. Caesar and Cleopatra had a son, Caesarion, during the 3 years they were together. Cleopatra met Caesar by having herself delivered to him in a rug, according to the historian Plutarch. But unlike his rival Mark Antony, Caesar was able to escape the arms and charms of Cleopatra and return to Rome, where he initiated the Egyptian calendar in 45 BC. The Roman calendar was called the AUC, so that's what that means, from ab urba condita, from the founding of the city of Rome. The AUC calendar had been so inaccurate that even though Caesar had crossed the Rubicon in January the 10th, 49 BC, several years later that date fell in mid-autumn. Caesar had seen the Egyptian calendar was a simpler one of 365 days with an extra day and an intercalary leap year date every fourth year in order to make up for the drift of the vernal equinox. Caesar wanted the new calendar to begin with his rule, but the Senate had always started a new year on January 1st, the month named after the god Janus, who had two faces, one looking ahead to the future and the other looking back to the past. July 1st is not the start of our new year. January 1st and the god Janus still stands guard over his territory. The Julian calendar would be used for the next 1600 years. But the Christian church had for centuries used a different calendar for its main celebration. The resurrection of Jesus, Easter, aka Pascha, Hebrew for Passover. The church calendar based on a lunar system had been devised at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 to ensure the church celebrated Easter on the exact Sunday of the resurrection. The church in Alexandria followed the solar calendar and had always celebrated Easter on the 14th day of the moon that falls on or after the vernal or spring equinox. The earth revolves around the sun, and 2 times each year the sun is exactly above the equator. These 2 times in September and March are equinoxes, meaning equal night, because the length of the day and night is almost equal in all parts of the world at those times, those 2 times. And let's not get in any flat earth debates here. This isn't simply about how the mathematics of the year work, and we all know that there is an equinox 2 times a year. By the 900s, most Christian churches celebrated Easter according to the Alexandrine vernal equinox drifts. When Julius Caesar established his calendar in 45 BC, he set March 25th as the spring equinox, because a Julian year of 365.25 days is slightly longer than the tropical year. The calendar drifted with respect to the equinox, such that the equinox was occurring on about March 21 in AD 300, and by AD 1500 it had reached March 11. By the 1500s, both the church's lunar calendar and the Julian calendar were off kilter, and Easter was being celebrated on the wrong day. So Pope Gregory the 13th left in the picture, and the learned ecclesiastics were determined to fix the problem of equinox drift and the confusion over the date of Easter once and for all. To remedy the drift problem, the Gregorian calendar dropped 10 days from the year in 1582 on Thursday, the October 4th, 1582. The church adopted what would be called the Gregorian calendar by a papal bull entitled Inter Gravissimas, among the greatest concern. And I'm just wondering, is when they put the 1 in front of the date instead of the J or the I, and added possibly 1,000 years to our history timeline. The Christian church may have had grave concerns about the date of Easter being astronomically inaccurate on the church lunar and Julian solar calendars, but the secular world was not obligated by a papal bull. The Catholic countries of Spain, Italy, Portugal, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, however, adopted the new calendar immediately. Scotland and most of the Protestant countries adopted Gregory's calendar in the 1700s. England and colonial America adopted it in 1752 when Alaska was purchased by the United States from Russia. In 1867, the Alaskan Territory began to keep Gregorian time. Russia remained on the Julian calendar till 1917 after the Russian Revolution, and Greece held on to Julian until 1923. That's really recent. Some tribes and isolated people still use the Julian calendar. Today, internationally, the Gregorian calendar is the only one used. It is so accurate it has an infinitesimal error of gaining only one day every 3,325 years. The Christian concern over the date of Easter has prevailed, even though most of the secular world had no idea there had been a problem. This divine obsession in the Christian church on fixing the exact date for the Paschal celebration had led Dionysius Exiguus, right in the picture right, in 525 to invent the AD BC Anno Domini year of the Lord before Christ, designations used in the Julian and Gregorian calendars. The monk Exiguus devised an arcane and confusing Paschal table to project from the past into the future the exact dates of Easter. His table was so mathematically and astronomically correct, it became the basis for not only prognosticating Easter for generations, but also for designating with AD BC everything after and before the birth of Christ. Calendars were traditionally invented and used to facilitate agricultural plantings and harvests, religious events, and the start of seasons, tribal migrations, and to chronicle the past. But since the advent of Jesus of Nazareth, the Christian Western world has been fixated on refining and correcting, ascertaining an exact Sunday in each year when Christians are to celebrate his resurrection. Countries with no Christian background have recognized the Gregorian calendar. Japan adopted it in January 1st, 1873, Korea on January 1st, 1895, and China in 1912. It may be for some an uncomfortable reality, but it is true that for over 2,000 years the world has had to reckon with a young Jewish rabbi who taught, lived, died, and according to his followers and their Bible, resurrected from the dead. The date on all of our 21st century calendars are reckoned from him, even if one writes BCE, CE. Okay, so that is true. Since the time of Jesus, everything for the world has changed. But in ancient Hebrew, the calendar the year was determined by the harvest. And they had two calendars, a solar and a lunar calendar, but the harvest being ripe was when the year started. So there's no way of truly knowing when the exact date or year that we're in, especially now that it's been changed to a Julian calendar. These are some comments from Plutarch on Caesar's calendar. It says, Caesar's reform of the calendar and the corrections made in the irregularity of reckoning time were not only studied by him with the greatest scientific skill, but were brought into effect and proved extremely useful. In very ancient times, there had been great confusion among the Romans with regard to the regulation of the lunar and the solar year, with the result that festivals and days or sacrifice gradually got out of place and finally came to be celebrated at the very opposite season to what was originally intended. Nor was the confusion confined to the remote past. Even at this time, most people were completely ignorant on these subjects. Only the priests knew the proper time, and they, without giving any notice, would suddenly insert in the calendar the intercalary month known as Mercedonius. It is said that this month was first put in by the legendary King Numa, who thus managed to find an unsatisfactory and short-lived remedy for the error in the adjustment of the sidereal and solar cycles. I have dealt with this subject in my life of Numa. Caesar, however, put the problem before the best scholars and mathematicians of the day, and out of the various methods of correction already in use, he formed a new method of his own which was more accurate than any of them. It is one still used by the Romans, and it seems that they, better than all other people have avoided the error arising from the inequality between the lunar and solar years. Yet, even this gave offense to those who looked at Caesar with envious eyes and resented his power. Certainly Cicero, the orator, when someone remarked that the constellation Lyra would rise next day, remarked, "No doubt it had been ordered to do so," implying that even the rising of the stars was something that people had to accept under compulsion. So this would have been a really big deal in Judea if Herod followed the edict of Julius Caesar and enforced a Julian calendar on the people. I can't find any information on this, whether he did do that, but certainly the Roman world would have been running on the Julian calendar, and that would have forced the people of Judea to follow this timeline regarding taxes and all of the business-related Roman duties, which would tie into the little horn changing times and laws. So getting back to the Aviv Bali, it says in this article, which I'll read, in the last chapter we saw how to determine Rosh Chodesh, the new moon day. In this chapter we will see that there is a special new moon day that also starts the year. This is called Rosh Hashanah, or the head of the year. The timing of Rosh Hashanah is critical, as it establishes the calendar year. If Rosh Hashanah is timed correctly, the rest of the feast will line up correctly with the other crop harvest. However, if it is timed incorrectly, the rest of the feast will not line up with the other crop harvests. As we will see, the timing of Rosh Hashanah is based on the first full sheaf of barley to come ripe in the land of Israel. That is because 15 to 21 days after we declare Rosh Hashanah, we must cut the very first sheaf of barley, first fruits, and present it to Yahweh on what is called Yom Hanaft HaOmer, the day of the wave sheaf offering. Further, the omer of barley needs to be in one of two special states, called Aviv and Carmel, and we will define these terms later in this chapter. This is critical because barley ripens very rapidly, and once it is ripe, it does not stay in the head very long, but falls to the ground. If we make a mistake and declare Rosh Hashanah too early, the barley will not yet have reached the Aviv or Carmel states. However, the much bigger danger is to wait too long and declare Rosh Hashanah too late. And many people make this error. However, if we do that, then the first fruits of barley will drop to the ground before we can present them to Yahweh. And while there may be other barley we can present, it will not be the first fruits. This also means that the farmers with the earliest ripening barley will not be able to harvest their crops on time, so they will lose their crops and be financially ruined. These errors are avoidable. So, we can see that the timeline of God and the time and the calendar of God isn't something that is mathematically set that we can record. You can't have a calendar and every day that day falls in the same time, because it's completely based on the cycles of the earth and the moon and the sun. And every year that's different. Every year the harvest ripens at a different time, and it's entirely based on God and the time clock of the universe. And I have no way of knowing what the real date is. According to the Jubilee cycles, Israel stopped following the Jubilees when they were taken to captivity in Babylon. And in Babylon, they started following the Babylonian solar and lunar calendars. So they lost the Jubilee cycles, which is, I believe, every 7 years you rest the land, and every 7 times 7 years, which is 49 to 50 years, you have a Jubilee year where ownership of the land goes back to the original owners. So it's 49 years, or 7 times 7, and on the 50th year is the Jubilee year. So every 50 years would be a a forgiveness of debt. So in the Babylonian calendar, the year began on the spring equinox based on 12 lunar months a year. Each month begins with a new crescent moon was observed. Months consist of 29 to 30 days. To keep the year by 352 days, a month was added every 3 years or so. Months were divided into weeks. Each week had 7 days. Each day consisted of 24 hours. Each hour consisted of 60 minutes, and each minute consisted of 60 seconds. The 60 bases system still in use. So that was the Babylonian calendar. And the Hebrew calendar was probably very similar, but as stated with the Aviv Bali, declaration of the new year was not based on a day or a calculated number. It was based on the ripeness of the harvest. So despite the fact that they have changed the time calendar and they have possibly added 1,000 years to that time, we will never know what time period we are in now. We won't know, even guaranteeing from the time of the birth of Christ, which all modern calendars are based on, up until now, they may have added 1,000 years, but we don't know if that's 1,001 or 900 years. We don't know the exact amount of time that they've added. We don't know prophetically what time we're in, and we may possibly be able to trace it via Jubilee cycles, because if we can work out the time of Jesus' resurrection, from there we can work out Jubilee cycles, because the resurrection was the Aviv Bali. That was the beginning of the new year. So if Jerusalem fell in 66 AD, when did they gain control of Jerusalem again? So we have the Crusades, and the Crusades were a series of religious wars initiated, supported, and sometimes directed by the Latin Church in the medieval period. The best known of these crusades are those to the Holy Land in the period between 1095 and 1291 that were intended to recover Jerusalem and its surrounding area from Islamic rule. Now I'm going to do a whole series of videos on the Crusades, or I want to do a whole series of videos on the Crusades, as I believe it ties in with much of what I've been learning. It's my opinion that the First and Second World War was just a neo-crusade, and this time around they had to defeat Germany because Germany had an agreement with the Ottoman Empire, and the Kaiser would not go out of his deal with the Ottoman Empire. So they had to defeat the Ottoman, they had to defeat the Germans, and they got the Balfour Declaration signed, which allowed them to take back Palestine, and by the Second World War, push the Jews of Europe into Palestine. And when I say they, I mean the Rothschild banking dragons and the Vatican, and they were in control of the British Parliament and the Commonwealth nations, including the USA, because the USA is legally just still a part of the British Empire. And before I get any Americans upset here, what I mean by that is that under Admiralty law, or the law of the sea, the British Empire still rule the United States through economics. It wasn't till the 6-Day War that they took Jerusalem back. That was in 1967. So 900 years after they lost Jerusalem, or the Herod rule fell in 66 AD. In 1967, they gained back control of Jerusalem. So there were The Crusades were a great military expedition undertaken by Christian nations of Europe for the purpose of rescuing the holy place of Palestine from the hands of the Mohammedans. They were 8 in number, the first 4 being sometimes called the Principal Crusades and the remaining 4 the Minor Crusades. In addition, there was a Children's Crusade. There were several other expeditions which were insignificant in numbers or results. The reason for the Crusades was a war between Christians and Muslims, which centered around the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem held a holy significance to the Christian religion. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem commemorated the hill of crucifixion and the tomb of Christ's burial, and was visited by pilgrims in 1065. Jerusalem was taken by the Turks, and 3,000 Christians were massacred, starting a chain of events which continued to the cause of the Crusades. The objective of the Crusades was at first to release the Holy Land, in particular Jerusalem, from the Saracens, but in time was extended to seizing Spain from the Moors, the Slavs, and pagans from Eastern Europe and the islands of the Mediterranean. There were a total of 9 crusades. The first 4 crusades were seen as the most important, and scant reference is made to the other crusades, with the exception of the Children's Crusade, which effectively led to the decline of the Crusades. For a period of 200 years, Europe and Asia were engaged in almost constant warfare. Throughout this period, there was a continuous movement of crusades to and from the Muslim possessions in Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. So the First Crusade, which lasted from 1095 to 1099, established the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, providing more lands for the Crusade Knights, who often travelled across Europe to try their fortunes and to visit the Holy Sepulchre. So the objectives there sounds like they needed to capture the Muslim or Islamic lands that were surrounding the Holy Land. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was gradually lost until the last Christian city, Acre, fell in 1291. The dream of returning to the Holy Land nonetheless proved popular. The kings of France and England frequently made such plans, though in nearly every case the Crusades were redirected or derailed by regional tensions. So the Crusades and the orders of religious knights. The Crusades also gave rise to the important knightly orders, the Knights Templar, the Teutonic Knights, and the Hospitallers. These were orders of religious knights working from monastic rule to defend the Holy Land and pilgrims en route to Jerusalem. The effects of the Crusade on Europe or the Middle Ages were an important factor in the history of the progress of civilization. The effects of a crusade influenced the wealth and power of the Catholic Church, political matters, commerce, feudalism, intellectual development, social effects, material effects, and the effects of the Crusades also promoted the famous voyages of discovery. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was ruled by European kings and queens between 1099 and 1291. This section detailed the founding of the Kingdom of Jerusalem by Godfrey of Bouillon, the first ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and its fall into the hands of Saladin. The names of the kings and queens of the Kingdom of Jerusalem are also listed on this section. The Crusaders came from both the upper and lower classes. What prompted tens of thousands of people to travel 1,000 miles to go on the first crusade? What privileges were granted to crusaders? So we have the Kingdom of Jerusalem, also known as the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem or the Frankish Kingdom of Palestine, was a crusade state established in southern Levant by Godfrey of Bouillon in 1099 after the First Crusade. The kingdom lasted nearly 200 years from 1099 until 1291, when its last remaining possession, Acre, was destroyed by the Mamluks. Its history is divided into 2 distinct periods. The First Kingdom of Jerusalem lasted from 1099 to 1187, before being almost entirely overrun by Saladin. Following the Third Crusade, the kingdom was re-established in Acre in 1192 and lasted until the city's destruction in 1291. This Second Kingdom is sometimes called the Second Kingdom of Jerusalem or the Kingdom of Acre. After its new capital, Acre remained the capital, except for the 2 decades which followed Frederick II of Hohenstaufen regaining the city of Jerusalem from the Ayyubids during the Sixth Crusade through diplomacy. The vast majority of the Crusades who established these and settled the Kingdom of Jerusalem were the Kingdom of France, as were the knights and soldiers who made up the bulk of the steady flow of reinforcements throughout 200-year span of its existence. Its rulers and elite were therefore of French origin. The French Crusaders also brought the French language to the Levant, thus making Old French the lingua franca of the Crusader states. Local Muslims and Christians made up the majority of the population in the countryside, but European, mainly French, Italian, and Catalan colonists also settled in the villages. So geographically, the First Kingdom was a little more than a loose collection of towns and cities captured during the First Crusade. But at its height in the mid-12th century, the kingdom encompassed roughly the territory of modern-day Israel, Palestine, and the southern parts of Lebanon. From the Mediterranean Sea, the kingdom extended in a thin strip of land from Beirut in the north to the Sinai Desert in the south, into modern Jordan and Syria in the east, and towards Fatimid Egypt in the west. 3 other Crusader states founded during and after the First Crusades were located further north: the country of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the country of Tripoli. While all 3 were independent, they were closely tied to Jerusalem. Beyond these, to the north and west lay the states of Armenian Cilicia and the Byzantine Empire, with which Jerusalem had a close relationship in the 12th century. Further east, various Muslim emirates were located, which were ultimately allied with the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. The kingdom was ruled by King Amari of Lusignan, the King of Cyprus, another Crusader state founded during the Third Crusade. Dynastic ties also strengthened with Tripoli, Antioch, and Armenia. The kingdom was soon increasingly dominated by Italian city-states of Venice and Genoa. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II had ambitions in the Crusader state, claiming kingdom by marriage, but his presence sparked a civil war. Among kingdom's nobility, the kingdom became little more than a pawn in the politics and warfare of the Ayyubid and Mamluk dynasties in Egypt, as well as the Khwarezmian and Mongol invaders. As a relatively minor kingdom, it received little finance or military support from Europe. Despite numerous small expeditions, Europeans generally proved unwilling to take an expensive journey to the east for an apparently losing cause. Mamluk sultans, Barbars, and Al-Ashraf Khalil eventually reconquered all the remaining Crusader strongholds, culminating in the destruction of Acre in 1291. So there we have it. Jerusalem was briefly occupied by some European kings, but they struggled to keep it, and the surrounding regions were constantly in war up until the modern day Balfour Declaration and the 1967 Six-Day War. And almost 1,000 years later, and if we look at this in the context that we have had 1,000 years taken from our history, and I want to show you something that really significant that happened. Okay, so in 1967, on the 5th of June, the Six-Day War, also known as the June War, and the 1967 Arab-Israeli War of the Third Arab-Israeli War was an armed conflict fought from the 5th to the 10th of June in 1967 between Israel and a coalition of Arab states, primarily comprising Jordan, Syria, and Egypt, and they're known as the United Arab Republic. So we have the fall of Jerusalem in the year 66, and we have the re-establishment of the power of Jerusalem in the year 1967. What I'm suggesting here is that this is the serpent or the dragon being unchained on the little season. And if you consider that possibly the start of the 1,000-year millennial reign started at the harvesting of the first fruits or the resurrection of Jesus and the saints, then we're getting awfully close to that 1,000 years coming to an end. If you consider the 1,000 years of added history or the possibility of it. And what was achieved in the 6-Day War? Well, the 6-Day War, also called the June War or Third Arab-Israeli War or Nakba, brief war that took place in June the 5th to the 10th in 1967 and was the third of the Arab-Israeli Wars. Israel's decisive victory included the capture of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the old city of Jerusalem and Golan Heights. So there we have it. They lost Jerusalem in the year 66, and they gained Jerusalem almost 1,000 or 2,000 as we know it years later. And I'm going to ask you, who is in control of the now nation of Israel? It's not the 12 tribes of Israel. It's the Dragon City of London, the Rothschild banking dynasty. And I am suggesting that as of the year 1967, that the dragon has been unchained and is in control of the land of Jerusalem. And it's been trying to gain control of this land since the time it fell. And I'm going to do future videos on this subject because I can't fit it all in here, but I'm going to point out a few things that have shown me this information. So here we have the red shield, the Edom red shield of the Rothschilds, the red shields. We have the Star of David, the so-called Star of David. This was never David's star. We have this Rothschild Star of David on the Israeli flag, and we have this Zionist state. We have this hexagram shape, which is apparently Mayor Amschel Bauer began hanging out a red hexagram in front of his house, hence the name Rothschild, from the German Rot equals red, Schild equals shield, the sign of the red shield, and we have on the Israeli flag the Rothschild hexagram. And there's no secret how involved the Rothschild family were in the British First and Second World Wars, signing of the Balfour Declaration and claiming the land of Palestine as Israel. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. And might we ask why dragons guard the city of London, the banking district who we know the Rothschild banking family runs? They run the city of London. They are the bankers for the Vatican. So I just want to ask the question, why is this coin from King Herod's kingdom? Why does it have the hexagram seal of the seal of Solomon or the Star of David of the House of Rothschild on a coin belonging to the Herods? And if we just have a brief look at the Star of David, the Shield of David, the name given in Judaism to the symbol consisting of two superimposed triangles forming a star, it is also known as the Star of David. Although it was used in the synagogue at Capernaum as early as the 3rd century, it was not commonly adopted as a Jewish symbol until much later. From the 13th century, the name figures in practical Kabbalah, and the symbol, believed to have magical properties, is found in association with the pentagram or Star of Solomon. The Magen David occurs in a Jewish context in Prague in the 17th century, In the 19th century, it was adopted by the First Zionist Congress as a symbol, and it appears on the flags of the Zionist organization and the State of Israel. The Nazis employed a yellow six-pointed star as a Jewish badge. So that's in a book from Dan Cohen Sherbook. And here it says that in the 12th century AD, an Ashkenazim, a Khazar Jew named Solomon ben Duji, claimed he was Elijah and that his son David El-Roy was the Messiah. They wrote letters to all the Jews in the land about them, proclaiming the coming of the Messianic kingdom. It has been discovered by researchers that the Star of David, also called the Shield of David and the Seal of Solomon, was not a symbol relating to either the biblical King David or Solomon, but to Solomon ben Duji, the Khazar, and his son David El-Roy. So there's a lot I could go into here with the Roth family of the Rothschilds and the City of the Dragon, and in future videos I'm going to try and attempt to trace their lineage. And after 70 AD, the Herod family's lineage gets very blurry. As we can see, they take on Roman names, they marry Roman aristocracy, and once they have changed their name to Roman names, it's pretty much almost impossible to trace where they went. But I'm going to try, and we'll just have a look at different ideas. But what I can trace is the movement of the Idumean people. And I can trace historical symbols, and I can trace the history of the Edomites. So even if I cannot prove to you that what I'm implying here, today's aristocratic royal families are descendants from these Herod families, like the Rothschilds, or the claim of the British royal family, the Saxe-Coburg-Windsors, to the throne of David. They claim, or people claim, that they are the descendants of the throne of David, and I'm beg to differ. I think that possibly, yes, they may be related to a family that sat on the throne of Judea, but I don't think it's the family of David. Or perhaps it is a claim via the Hasmonean princess that King Herod married, Mariamne. So I'm going to wrap the video up there, and any more information I have to show is going to just make this too long. However, just to recap, what I am suggesting in this video is that the little horn of the beasts of Daniel are the Herod family, that later reveals itself as the dragon, the seven-headed dragon in the book of Revelation, as the Herod dynasty, and that dragon is chained in a place of the abyss of no knowledge, of darkness, and it loses its power until it is unchained, and it has the ability to deceive the world and bring the armies of Gog Magog against the saints. And I think we're in that time now. I think that in the year 1967, when the Rothschild state of Israel gained back possession of the city of Jerusalem, which fell to Vespasian, and we have only a short time before the fulfillment of Revelation 20 happens, because we're in the end of that little season. We're not in the beginning of it. And I don't know how long that season is, but I know how it ends. And that ends with the second resurrection of the dead by Jesus Christ, the real King of the new heavens and the new earth, Israel.
It's not a brilliant one.
I've got something, but it's